First-person shooters have been a staple of video games for the last 20 years, bringing forward gaming's most iconic titles, from Doom, GoldenEye, Halo, Call of Duty, Counter-Strike, Overwatch, and most recently, Valorant.
I am Valorant World Champions!
Regardless of when you were born, at some point in these last 50 years, you have been able to enjoy a first-person shooter on a console or a personal computer. Today, you can easily find all sorts of competitions, from a wide variety of FPS games, speedruns, to online tournaments, and even stadium-sized LAN tournaments for millions of dollars. Over these last years, these games have turned from simple point-and-click games to highly dynamic eSports, which gamers devote their entire life to make a living and aspire to become legends.
2021! It's now me!
Which 3 decades ago would be unimaginable. So let's look back and look at the rise of FPS games, the early stages of eSport, and the rise to prominence in modern culture. This is the history of first-person shooters. The FPS genre actually has quite a unique start, with its first true game of the genre not coming from some gaming studio, but rather from NASA.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The US space program. Just 4 years after landing on the moon, NASA, through their work-study program, provided 3 budding developers named Greg Thompson, Steve Cowley, and Howard Palmer access to technology that they would never find at their local computer store. During this program, in 1973, they would use the IMLEC PDS-4 minicomputer to build a basic game that was so bare bones that it only barely resembles the FPS genre. And off this one prototype, the 3 developers would spend the remainder of the decade creating more and more variations of the game, implementing features that would become central to the brand new genre, with the first consumer-level game being released, MIDI Maze. Published on the Atari ST, it was a very rudimentary game with a basic maze mechanics, circles that represented players, and bullets that fire from the player's body to hit other players. And while this is an interesting premise, it didn't quite take the world by storm like they thought it would have. The reason it failed at being a gaming giant was because the game was networked in 1980. Some of the only places to play network games were at universities or if you had multiple computers in the same space. And at that time, it was not viable for the average consumer to have multiple devices. MIDI Maze went unrecognized for years to come, but today it's looked as a technological marvel and the grandfather of not only FPS games, but the deathmatch format we have now. While MIDI Maze didn't immediately change gaming on its own, it did pave the way for the first popularly recognized first-person shooter, Wolfenstein 3D. Launched in May of 1992, Wolfenstein 3D, unlike gaming today, required you to have a computer with a digital operating system, or DOS, which was on a floppy disk. Then, you would need a copy of Wolfenstein 3D and knowledge of command lines, a pretty involved process to play this new game, but because of how breathtakingly good the game looked, everyone wanted to have it. Wolfenstein 3D released to critical acclaim and somewhat commercial success, selling 250,000 copies at the time. The game was revolutionary because it used ray casting, which is a method where the player can only see the rendered graphics based on their location on a 2D plane. While not a 3D environment, it did allow the player to see an illusion of 3 dimensions. Paired up with a single-player campaign, the developers behind Wolfenstein, ID Software, would popularize the first-person shooter to the mass gaming audience. This game changed the landscape so much that the competition to PCs in the Amiga would file bankruptcy after failing to keep up with the PC's power and ability to run these demanding games. During the rise in the early 90s, it became clear with FPS games being so popular that most gaming companies were looking into replicating Wolfenstein's success. But no one would be able to pull off what ID Software accomplished except ID Software themselves, cementing the genre forever in the gaming conscious by releasing one of the most influential games of all time. Just 2 weeks before Christmas, in 1993, we were given After the success of Wolfenstein, 27-year-old developer John Carmack was riding the incredible wave of gaming stardom and experience programming highly successful FPS games. He decided to take the biggest plunge into the genre and see how he could push the game genre. A year and a half after Wolfenstein 3D's release, Doom was introduced to the world, fit with a beautiful horror sci-fi aesthetic that would set a new gaming standard in graphics, with a soundtrack inspired by metal music. A real departure from the 8-bit child sounds that Koji Kondo had pioneered. To add to the game, it was also one of the best feeling FPS games that had ever come out, enhancing what made Wolfenstein so fun all along with more fluid gameplay and levels. John Carmack and the team designed the game's flow to feel like the player was a demon slayer, killing one nightmarish monster to another with such dynamic pace that it became addictive. David Kushner, a writer for Wired, described the game as an overnight phenomenon, with the game making profit for the studio within the first day of its release, equaling the same revenue they made during Wolfenstein's entire first month sale. While they officially sold 200,000 copies within the first year, the shareware version would be distributed over 1 million times, with Doom becoming the main talk of gaming circles and driving a whole new audience to see that gaming and FPS was more than just a kid's pastime. The first-person shooter became a core gaming genre, with clones and cheap knockoffs hitting the shelves in droves. There were a few interesting hints of future innovations and fun takes on the genre, like Duke Nukem by 3D Realms and Marathon by Bungie, which would give their small gaming studio an opportunity to develop another important title in the FPS genre. At the time, none of these Doom clones were really pushing the genre forward like Doom had when it released. So to make their own statement on Doom clones, they put together their own clone. But here, instead of playing it safe, they went on a different take and pushed the genre forward to new heights and audiences. That game was Quake. What John Carmack and the rest of ID Software were oblivious to was that the spiritual successor of Doom in Quake would launch the very start of FPS eSports and set in motion the arena-filling, million current viewer spectacle that we know it as today.
Jump goes through, and stop! Erupted with the reverse sweep!
And it all started in a suburb just outside of San Francisco called Los Altos, with teenager Denise Fong. After moving from China at the age of 11, he became interested in gaming, with him really gaining an interest in Doom at 16, playing against his brother who also happened to have a computer as well, allowing them to put on LAN matches together, something that would be very unlikely for many families, but Denise's father worked at HP, allowing them this unique opportunity to compete in brotherly grudge matches all the time. The mental agony he would inflict on his two younger brothers led him to take on the nickname Threshold of Pain, which would later be shortened to Thresh to fit the 8-character tag limit. So with his iconic in-game name and the new innovation in online multiplayer in Quake, it was a no-brainer to quench his ever-growing need for competition, and this desire would lead him to move on to Quake. And while we won't cover the entire history of Denise's career, make sure to subscribe because we will be making a video about Thresh and his journey to become the first ever esports player. While Denise was in his freshman year of college, a tournament named Red Annihilation, hosted by John Carmack in Quake, was announced, where John Carmack, alongside a $5,000 prize pool and the 1987 Ferrari, worth about $100,000 today, which at the time was unheard of. So Denise, alongside 2,000 other players, joined the open qualifier. Quickly, years of competing with his younger brother paid off as he destroyed the competition, with others on the server calling out his unreal game sense. This led him to become one of 16 finalists flown out to E3 and compete for the trophy. While there is no footage other than some pictures from the event and the actual gameplay of the game, it was said that the crowd gathered as they competed on the main stage, with people at the end of it erupting in celebration as Thresh finished off Tommy Entropy Kimsey to not only win the prize and the Ferrari, but also gaining the title of the first esports pro. making Quake and the FPS genre the first esport. While Thresh's pro career wouldn't ever reach the heights of Red Annihilation and John Carmack's Ferrari ever again, the peak of arena shooters was just getting underway. The Quake esports scene exploded as more and more people competed, with tournaments popping up from comic book shop backrooms to massive convention halls, with prize pools starting to almost reach the 6 digits, and the possibility of being an FPS esports pro for a living became an actual reality. Within a handful of years and the turn of the millennium, Quake and future iterations had become the main staple in gaming, already becoming mainstream enough that there were all women's tournaments for the game, as well as TV channels dedicated exclusively to playing Quake matches all day long.
Welcome to the Republic. I'm Sonia Soul.
And I'm Stevie.
During Quake's peak, as the 20th century ended, another budding studio was making their own version of Quake, with their lead developer having a surprisingly similar ascension as John Carmack and ID Software. 29-year-old Tim Sweeney saw the success of Quake and its esport and wanted to see if Epic Games could improve on the formula. That's how Unreal Tournament came into existence.
The rules of engagement have changed. Aerial combat. Awesome new weaponry. The tournament just went into overdrive.
The main focus of the game to create an esports that was easily viewable by spectators and set up in a way to give players that really grinded it an endless skill ceiling. This combination was perfect for a thriving esports and quickly caught on in the FPS scene, as both local and regional events started popping up, allowing Epic Games and Team Sweeney to truly start their own gaming journey, which would eventually lead them into Fortnite. But at the time, Unreal Tournament was sweeping the esports world as people competed to take home the ever-growing prize pools and more eyes fell on the games. What really set Unreal apart from other Doom and Quake clones trying to build an esport was the level of depth in the game, requiring much more strategy than the FPS arena shooters before it, putting Unreal up there right away as one of the premier games in the genre. This ascension to the esports supremacy would launch one of the greatest gaming rivalries for the first esports craze, with Quake and Unreal trying to outdo each other with bigger tournaments, better upgrades, and tweaks for every iteration of their games. Leading these two gaming studios locked in a constant arms race for the next 5 years to be crowned the definitive esports game, raising the genre standards to unimaginable new heights as every aspect of the Doom shooter style were meticulously being perfected more than 10 years after its release. But as the rivalry raged on over multiple years, the FPS audience saw their interest shift over time, as brave new subgenres sprouted and console capabilities improved by leaps every new release. ID Software and Epic Games were too busy fighting to take any real creative risk outside of their current game's identity, which would lead audiences to start to move on to different games, allowing way for other genres like fighting games, and RTS to surpass them.
Damage, GG! The game goes to MC! It's only the round of 16!
By the mid-2000s, the true arena shooter era that started with Doom decades prior was clearly coming to an end, as fewer and fewer tournaments were being attended. But the FPS audience wasn't gone. Instead, the desire for a new, innovative take on the first-person shooter just kept growing. And to provide for that hunger, two major gaming franchises would make their legendary debuts, and it all started with the beginning of the modern console wars.